No pat down for you, sucker. Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report, and Harley Schlanger's here. And again, what news isn't happening? We were just talking about the new dictionary. I should call it the Geopolitical Dictionary of the Globalist Banksters. The Satanic Dictionary of Geopolitics, where war is peace, humanitarian aid that the Russians want to bring in, I think it's up to 380 trucks, are being blocked by the so-called Kiev government of Poroshenko, which is, and they call him the Chocolate King, but he's actually the prostitute and drug king. And then he's also a dual citizen of the state, of the satanic state of Israel, the Sabbatean, satanistic, out-of-its-mind control state, that when it runs out of ammo, it just goes to where ammo supplies. Hey, Americans, no problem, right? We just use your bombs. And so Obama's dropping a love letter in with the bombs and saying, now please don't bomb the Palestinians. And of course, as we do a bombing of the Iraqis, we give man-pads to ISIS. So I think we also gave them LED lights so that they can actually sit up on the ground when they bomb our Hercules C-130s that are going to come in with man-pads. They hit them with these missiles. They can say, have a nice day, say hello to Allah for us. I think our foreign policy is so nuts that if you actually had review of the people involved, all of them, including Hillary Clinton, who's now criticizing Obama, you'd have to say they all belong in a psych ward and don't ever give them day passes. This is pretty damned crazy, what we're doing.
But we are dealing with the only proper term for it is a satanic force.
Right.
But it's not a general satanic force. It's really the mother of Satan, the Queen of England, who's directing this.
Right, the chief reptile.
And what people don't recognize is that everything Obama is doing is coordinated from the British Empire. Tony Blair is one of the key intersection points between the monarchy and governments. And interestingly, you have a situation where Obama is so disrespected now in Europe that the Queen is sending out David Cameron to be the spokesman for the policies. And so
funny.
Cameron was the one who went to Brussels and delivered the message to Rasmussen, the head of NATO, to go to Kiev and tell Poroshenko, under no circumstance can you have any agreement with Putin. And so the Russians now are trying to bring some aid into eastern Ukraine, where the Kiev government is committing war crimes. I mean, they're using missiles, they're using heavy artillery to shoot up
against civilians.
Buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just murder. It's not so different from what the Israelis did against the Palestinians in Gaza. But what the Russians worked out, Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, with the International Red Cross, with the Ukrainian government, they worked out to bring in a convoy of trucks. And then all of a sudden, Obama called Poroshenko, in between golf holes out in Martha's Vineyard. Obama had a talk with Poroshenko and read him the Riot Act and said, don't let those trucks in. It's an invasion. So Poroshenko said, all this aid has to be either switched to Ukrainian trucks or they won't be let in. Now, Ukraine has no trucks. So as the trucks approach the border, Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, got a go-ahead again from the Ukrainian government. Then he was told no. Then the NATO head, Rasmussen, said this would be an invasion. And now at the last minute, as the trucks arrived at the Ukrainian border, I'm told in the last hour they started crossing into Ukraine. But now you've got another danger, which is the Azov Brigade, which is the hardcore right sector neo-Nazis in Ukraine, are saying this is an invasion and they're going to shoot the Russians. Now they'll probably shoot the Red Cross people and anyone else. So
you the Russians
we're on
driving
a real
the truck,
hair trigger now in Ukraine.
You're talking about the Russian drivers of the trucks.
There are Russian civilians who are part of the convoy, and then there are International Red Cross people from France and Switzerland who are also involved. But
I think this is going to blow up in
the Israelis just blow up Red Cross and UN facilities in Gaza with no sanctions or anything?
Well, no, of course, it's the whole idea that you can't criticize Israel or America, no matter what they do. If they fillet children alive in the square and then eat them and roast them, it's perfectly fine, because America or Israel does it. or the bankers. And whatever the bankers do, in fact, if you resist us, you're automatically a terrorist. If you even try to do humanitarian aid to the people we're bombing, or try to get them out of the danger zone of Donetsk and Slavyansk and these other places, you're considered an enemy of the globalist state, and you're persona non grata. And I think we should have enough with these people. I mean, it's time for us to finally put our foot down and say, people need to start considering whether or not they need to dissect themselves away from the British Empire completely and set up a new economic order. Because that's ultimately what this is all about. This is all about dollars. Who's going to control? Who's going to be king of the hill? Who's going to have the money machine to create all the wealth on the planet?
Well, it's also, can they keep the rest of the world accepting the dollar system with its debt? Now, there's new reports coming out of Europe of panic because the Italian government, which had forecast growth for this quarter, just reported negative growth. So Italy is officially in a recession. Greece is officially in a recession. So is Spain. France was at 0% growth officially, but they're probably in a recession. You have banks on the verge of cratering, and the chief economist, the former chief economist for the Bank for International Settlements, a very competent economist named William White, said that the problem is not all the bad leverage debt. It's that the assets which are used to leverage the debt are also non-performing. They were saying previously that 13% of the assets used to back up all the leverage were non-performing. Now new figures show 30 to 35%, which means in addition to 30-to-1 leverage, which is exactly what Lehman had when it collapsed in September 2008, you now have that one that it's based on. 1/3 of those dollars in assets are also worthless. So you can add another 33% to the volume of worthless debt.
Well, the old story is,
they could ever collect it.
Well, the thing is, though, here's what the real issue is. They can either do one of three things. They can actually just write off the debt, which, of course, they don't want to write off because it means that a lot of the money and wealth that they've accumulated doesn't even exist. It's all on paper.
That's what William White, by the way, is saying, that you can't let it slowly unwind, because it's not going to slowly unwind. It will start cratering. You've got to write it off quickly if you want to save anything of the system.
It's like amputating a limb. If you start to write it off slowly or degrade it, or people start to catch on that it's being written off, everybody will race and you'll have a bond market collapse, which means the entire world economy will crater. Even nations that aren't tied directly to the dollar will crater. Because everything's interlocked. And people don't understand this, that what we need to do is just write it all off. That's, like sawing off a bad limb that's been hit in the Civil War with a cannonball, and now it's going to go gangrenous. And if you don't do it very quickly and swiftly, and then the second thing that should happen is we need to have sovereign nations, where we have a Bretton Woods-style system where we've interlocked the relative exchange between different countries, and you can't just print more money out of thin air. Every time they print money, they dilute the money that's already there. An economy should then have ways of measuring the physical or intellectual or other property or assets of a country, and then you can expand the money supply based on those expansion of intellectual and physical assets. If you can prove that on some kind of a formula and have that formula universally agreed upon, then you have a real economy that's based on real assets that don't get diluted. But when you just print money out of thin air, anybody's home, their mortgage, their assets, their pension funds become diluted and become less valuable. So, for example, we just got sent a notice that we could remortgage at a lower rate. It doesn't mean they're giving us a big deal. It means that they've actually taken equity out of our home in order to promulgate further wars and further atrocities. That's what's really going on. And this has got to stop. We've got to stop pouring money into destroying the planet and fighting each other, and realize that that the plans of rebuilding actual infrastructure, like LaRouche has said all along, like Nawapa, we talked about this yesterday, about the potential for energy flux density, nuclear fusion technology, advanced genetic engineering, advanced supercomputing for everyone, not just the few people in a few universities. This will transform the world. It'll create new wealth, real wealth that can be measured.
And there are moves in this direction that we need to talk about.
Right. And if we don't move in that direction, we don't write off all this damn debt, we're going to destroy the world economy, and we'll have destitution, and plagues will follow. Welcome back. Harley, we talked about some very important topics and the repercussions to the back-and-forth sanctions by Europe against Russia and Russia against Europe. What's going on? You mentioned a few on the break that if people don't grasp, this is really going to kill Europe. Europe is just teetering on the edge of catastrophe, isn't it?
Well, when I was in Austria last month and I had a chance to meet with some bankers, they were in a total panic because the single resolution mechanism, which basically means Brussels and the EU dictating to nations what they can do, was just going into effect. And so in Austria, where the government was going to write down debts and let this one large savings and loan go under, they were forced to bail it out to the tune of 6 billion euros. The whole Austrian national budget is only 70 billion euros, so they had to add almost 10% to their total, which put them into a deficit in order to bail out one bank. Now, they were told that they no longer can let these banks go under. They have to be protected. The dead banks have to be protected by the EU so they can loot all the real assets and then make the states take the bad debt. Now, what happened then in Italy with the banking crisis there, you have in Spain and Portugal banking crisis. It's spreading into France with the Crédit Agricole. So the European nations are fragile to start with. Now then you add to that Obama and Cameron cracking down, saying that it's essential that they support the sanctions against Russia. So this means Germany is going to lose fuel. Fuel will be lost to all of Europe. But then what the Russians did is they said, okay, we're going to issue counter-sanctions. So the Russians put a sanction against all European fruit and vegetables coming into Russia. And Russia imports a lot of food from Europe, especially Greece and Spain and Portugal, and some from France, and apples from Poland. Now, in the last 2 days, when the 2 days ago it started, and Poland went nuts. Here the Poles are saying, we want NATO troops, we want planes, we want tanks. And now they've got a bigger problem. They have all these apples that are going to rot in Polish trucks because they were turned back from Russia.
Oh, my.
Portugal and Spain. Spain has a large export to Russia. So does Italy. And so these countries are now protesting. Now, with Italy, it's very interesting. Mario Draghi, who's the head of the European Central Bank, told the Italian government that they've made some progress in budget cuts, but not nearly enough. And in a press conference in Frankfurt on Monday, he said Italy must give up more sovereignty to Brussels. And all of a sudden, all the political parties in Italy said, you can't take away our sovereignty. Now, of course, they already have taken away most of it. But now when you add to this the EU solid front with Obama and Cameron, this is going to destroy these economies. Now, so what did the Russians do? The Russians set up a huge deal with Egypt to get Egyptian vegetables in return for Russian wheat. They've made a major deal with China for food, and now they're talking to South American countries. So the government of Ecuador immediately said, sure, we'll ship you fruits and vegetables. And the European Union representative went to the president of Ecuador and said, this is not a good idea for you to go outside the European Union sanctions. And the president of Ecuador said, we're not part of the EU, and we're not going to put sanctions against a friendly government.
Well, let me explain. This is a real point. Whatever new financial order develops that Europe tries to expand, including America with these new transatlantic partnerships, they do want this kind of control. They want to be able to call up on the phone or text or email the Ecuadorians and say, no, you're not doing this. Even though you're not part of the EU, you signed this kind of international trade agreement, and our bureaucrats have said, no apples, no fruit to Russia, because we're going to squeeze them. And the Ecuadorians, thank God, and these other countries have got two clues and realize that the Russians just want to buy some fresh fruit. And they just want to do business. And when they change their partnerships and they no longer get Europeans, the Europeans are going to shrivel on the vine. It's really catastrophic. And, of course, I talk to Europeans all the time, and you've been back and forth. Your wife is Austrian. And they tell me that Europe is so mismanaged by these bureaucrats, it's killing the whole region. It's killing it.
No, that's exactly the case. And the governments are stuck with the International Monetary Fund and the European Union telling them what to do. Now, the IMF former chief economist, so now you have the BIS and the IMF chief economist, both saying that the explosion of derivative obligations is going to crash the whole system. So now you have people on the inside saying that. And Draghi is saying, no, the way we're going to save the system is we're going to force more cuts. Now, at the same time, they're demanding these governments, which are bankrupt, to cut spending further for social services. They're now demanding that they spend more on defense so they can put more troops into Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland. This is, this is like through the looking glass. This is so bizarre. And then you and I were joking earlier today. It's not a joke, but Obama's now sending more Marines into Iraq. We're in a situation where a terrorist grouping that we facilitated, we worked with the Saudis to build them up through Turkey, to arm them with arms coming from the Libyan project from Benghazi. That's what created ISIS and turned them into this so-called ferocious force. And while we're continuing to threaten Assad, who's the only guy fighting these terrorists, now Obama wants to send 130 Marines in who he says are non-combat, so it's not boots on the ground for humanitarian protection. Now, why is it that we're going to protect the Yazidis when we weren't going to protect the Shiites, we weren't going to protect the Syrian Jews, we weren't going to protect Syrian Christians, we're not protecting Eastern Ukrainian Orthodox? What you see is that Obama is a complete psychotic and a complete liar on top of that. So we were joking when he says no boots on the ground. Does that mean the Marines are going to go in with no shoes?
Yeah, well, actually, they tie the shoes around their neck, and they put their shoes on when they shoot. Then they take them off again and put them around their neck again, because that way he can get around having to ask Congress for a deployment of troops, which, by the way, Democrats and Republicans just a few weeks ago passed a resolution that if Obama placed an expansion of troops in literally Gulf War III in Iraq, that they could literally start the process of impeachment. I think what you should do...
Two people came out yesterday. Barbara Lee, who was one of the people who drafted that resolution, came out and said, well, if he's doing this in the short term to protect the Americans in Erbil, fine, but we have to see evidence that it's not an offensive maneuver. And then Senator Tim Kaine, a Democrat from Virginia, said 48 hours are up. You now have to come before the Congress. Of course, the problem is the Congress is out of session and shows no inclination yet to go
back. Well, that's because Boehner, the Speaker of the House, should be impeached first before Obama. I'm calling for Boehner's impeachment. I want a Boehner gone before Obama's gone. If Boehner's gone, the stumbling block of the Republican Party to be called back into session to deal with all these crises and to deal with the abominator who is violating congressional and separation of powers, it's craziness.
You know what they say, no boners in the House.
Well, let's get him out of there. Let's do a bonerectomy. Well, Harley, what I've heard is from Michael Connolly from the U.S. Justice Foundation, who's been on recently in the last week, that it's likely that there'll be no move by the Republicans because they don't want to risk the idea of potentially losing some Senate seats before the midterm elections. Although I think it's a suicidal and stupid move, he thinks it's very probable, from the context he's had, that they won't make any moves until after midterm. Then it's really going to heat up. And that tells me that it's going to be particularly dangerous because you have a penned animal, which is Obama. He really is an animal. And the people behind him are completely soulless monsters. They're likely to whip something together to create martial law or create a state of national emergency. And I think that Obama is fully prepared after the holidays. I call it the nightmare before Christmas. Before the holidays to actually do something catastrophic, or shortly after the new year in 2015, so that he can maintain power even if he's, to quote, the unelected dictator, just like the puppet dictators of the Central and South America. I think Obama and his people are not beyond trying to make him the last president because he'll become El Dictator. That's what I think Obama is. He shows signs, I call the nascent signs of Caligulitis, I call it.
Well, it's true, but let's just call it what it is. The Republicans who say these things are the worst kind of opportunists because they're going to risk the nation getting into a
Michael's not happy about that. Michael's not happy about it. He thinks that they should be moving now because the danger of us having an expanded war that could go nuclear any day. We've had Russian bombers literally on our coast here in California and all over the United States, the East Coast, West Coast, everywhere. Russians even showing up in the Gulf of Mexico. I don't think people realize that the Russians are majorly ticked. And they have this dead hand policy now where if they detect any kind of launch by America or America's allies against Russian territory, we're all going to get nuked, and there's not a damn thing we can do to stop it. And the fools out there in the military who think U.S. Space Command has these anti-missile systems like the Iron Dome for the world over America, they're crazy, and they bought the lie, like that song. They bought the lie, they bought the lie.
Yeah, but let's focus on the national salvation, which is going to require a bipartisan effort. Now, the problem with the Republicans is that they're saying, yes, Obama's impeachable, but we don't have the votes. Now, what's wrong with that is that they're going at every single issue. They're combining Fast and Furious and the IRS scandal with the danger of thermonuclear war and support for terrorism. I say let's take the most important issues. The continuity between Benghazi and Obama's policy built on top of the Bush-Cheney policy, which is what caused ISIS or the Islamic State to exist. Right. Let's take the support of Nazis in Ukraine to move to the point of war with Russia. Now, if you take those two issues, and if the truth is told about them, there's no way in the world that the Democrats are going to be able to support Obama. So if the Republicans really want to do it, don't wait till January 2015 for the possibility they'll win the Senate, because you still need a two-thirds vote. They should go to the Democrats now, to people like Wyden of Oregon, Udall of Colorado. There's a woman running for Senate in West Virginia, Natalie Tennant, who's a Democrat, who said that she's doing big attacks on Obama over the coal policy. You know, there's a potential to pull together a national coalition, and the example I would use is what happened on August 7th, 1974, when Barry Goldwater, who was a Republican, Senator Hugh Scott, who was the minority leader, the Republican leader of the Senate, and John Rhodes, who was the minority leader in the House, went in to tell Nixon, fella, time's up. You got to leave. We don't have the votes to protect you. The nation is going to suffer if you stay in any longer. Right. And the next night, Nixon wrote his resignation letter, and then on August 9th, just a couple days ago, was the 40th anniversary of that, Nixon went on television and said he's leaving. Now, why not have honest Republicans get together with honest Democrats who know Obama's a catastrophe? Obama's destroying the old constituency of the Democratic Party of labor, minorities, seniors. They're being destroyed by his policies. He's destroying the military. He's destroying what's left of our industrial sector. Why not pull together a national unity movement that basically says we're taking the country back from Wall Street, back from British control, and Obama, you have to leave. Now, if they did that, and Obama said no, then you go with an all-out offensive to tell the truth about what a bum this guy is. And I think already most Americans want to see him gone.
Well, to the Democrats, he's an embarrassment, but they don't want to speak about it because they're embarrassed. He supported him so long.
Well, he's an embarrassment. That's definitely true, but it's even worse than that. He's allowed the Democratic Party to become a part of this Wall Street coalition.
Exactly. He violated the basic principles on which the original Democratic Party was based, which is the exact opposite of what it supposedly stands for, especially the so-called blue dog Democrats are the ones that say we really care about bringing up the lower classes of people that are been held down, whether they're a different color or they're new immigrants, etc. Instead, what Obama's done is increase there's a 23% drop in salaries they've proven now with the Council on Mayors. We just talked about
the U.S. Mayors Council. That was an interesting report, isn't it?
Yeah, and then we have a situation where all we have is 90% of the new jobs are what we call MIC jobs, so you can't afford an apartment or a home or go to school. We have Obama degrading the country, so more and more transnational corporations and American businesses, because the paperwork and in the state and federal governments, it's not just the federal, is so horrendous. If you want to set up a business to manufacture anything, do it in Indonesia, do it in India, Kerala, India, do it in China. and you can get it done in 90 days. You can have it up and operational in the factory. The board's up, the machine's in, everything moving. 90 days max.
Well, we're losing the country more rapidly than ever. This National Mayor's Report showed that we've now replaced most of the jobs that were lost from 2007, 2008, 2009. But the average wage of the jobs lost was $61,000.
Right.
The average wage of the jobs gained is $47,000. So that's where you get this 23% drop in national income. Now, this is the so-called recovery.
Yeah.
And we're in a situation where this is just going to get worse. And, how are the Democrats, supposedly the anti-austerity party, going to explain this to the voters?
Right.
So now the Republicans don't have solutions. They're just demagoguing it, saying Obama's no good, vote for us, we're against Obamacare.
Plus, we want to just make cuts.
How could you not defeat Obamacare? It's the worst policy we've ever had.
Well, here's my policy for health care. And it goes beyond the stupid system in Canada, Britain, Australia, France, or anywhere. My system is far more aggressive. Number one, all health professionals should be hired by the primary care doctors. Number one. Number two, everybody's put on salary. They're hired through the county. All the money goes to federal and state tax. There's no such thing as insurance anymore, no malpractice anymore, no state licensing authority. It's federally licensed through the private agencies of surgeons, say the American College of Surgeons, etc., and they have proper monitoring to make sure people have skill sets. They go back and do mini courses to make sure they know how to do a knee arthroscopic repair or a cardiocentesis or whatever the heck they do is their bailiwick or basket of tools. All doctors have to be upgraded to understand things like bioterrorism. Everybody should be trained doctors. They're now training veterinarians because they don't have enough doctors trained in ATLS and ACLS. So if we ever had a national real crisis, we don't have enough MDs and nurses trained, so we're hiring veterinarians to try to fill the gap. That's stupid. This is a national policy. The healthcare costs would plummet to be a quarter of what they are now. No one would get refused because you don't have insurance. Everybody, it's a right to be an American, or even if you visit here, you're taken care of. This idea of fee for service is nuts. And malpractice, you have mediation, you have education, and you move forward with integration of functional medicine with all of healthcare. That'll fix it.
Sounds good.
Welcome back, and Hurley, we were talking on the break about helium-3, and it's very disturbing to see stuff that I know since the mid-'90s when I had Q-level security clearance at U.S. Space Command, Strategic Defense and Star Wars, working with employees working on these classified projects. And basically I worked taking care of employees on pretty well all of them. And I can tell you, we've had tokamak fusion helium-3 reactors for 60 years, almost 60 years. We have entire space fleets of the Aurora Space Fleet that literally started to come out of service in 2010 because we have more advanced interplanetary space vehicles that use fusion reactors. This technology has been miniaturized. I mean, there's no reason why we don't have limitless, non-oxygen consuming energy, and that's the point. Getting rid of old, stupid, and dangerous nuclear fission technology that creates dangerous isotopes that last for billions of years. We don't need to. Burning off so-called fossil fuels, which never existed because it's all literally being rebirthed by the Earth, but there's a limit on our carbon-oxygen cycle because we're killing the oceans and cutting down the forests. So we need to have a way of generating...
Let me just take this narrative up in terms of the developments that most Americans don't know about because our media won't talk about it.
Of course not.
Just to give you an example, there was a conference 2 days ago at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. to take up the question of what are the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, who just had a very significant summit July 15th in Fortaleza, Brazil. And they tried to diminish them, saying, we don't really need this, it's redundant. We have the IMF and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization. The fact is that the present financial system, and this is the starting point for what people have to understand, what everyone thinks is of value is of no value. This dollar system is gone. It still exists on paper, but it's not going to last. Now, the point is that before it blows out, there are governments that are trying to move out of it. the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, Brazilians, South Africa, but many, many other weaker governments are saying, what's the alternative? And so what they did at the BRICS summit was they established what they call a new development bank. Initially, it's capitalized at $100 billion. Now, that's not enough to have a new monetary system, but that's just a start. The other thing is they're not going to have the kinds of conditionalities that the IMF has, which basically says your loans depend on you cutting your budget so that the money never gets to production. And what we need is to reestablish a standard of value in physical production. Now, that's what the BRICS are talking about. That's what the Russians are doing. That's what the Chinese are doing. Now, they're talking about initially projects such as high-speed rail systems across South America, across Africa. They're talking about bridges. They're talking about water projects in countries that don't have clean water. That's part of the reason these epidemics are spreading. But they're also talking about major space programs. They're talking about mining the moon. They're talking about fusion reactors. And the problem is under Obama, we're opposed to those things. The United States has a green agenda, as does Germany, as does the British. The green agenda means wipe out populations.
Right.
And that's the American people are tolerating this.
Well, let me clarify a little bit more. It's what I call a bifurcation technology thesis. So the British and the American and the bankers have for 70 plus years, for more than 100 years actually, worked on the idea of bifurcating society to create limitless energy, space technology, life extension, and supercomputing that they don't want the public to have. And I mentioned this the other day, that a real refurbished Europe will require 3 legs. Number 1, limitless energy, which will come out of the Hadron Collider, called fusion technology, and major fusion energy engines that will generate enough power they'll have literally limitless power. Number 2, they need to have supercomputing for the average person. So if you have a 10-year-old access to supercomputing with nonlinear program like Pascal or PL1 or one of the other nonlinear programs, you pass this on to teenagers and kids that are 5, 6, 10 years old, you're going to have experts in their 20s that can literally do miracles. And the third thing is the idea of not stupid genetic engineering, but smart. In other words, wiping out illness, creating new types of stable genetically modified things that aren't unstable. When we went back in our research, we found out that spelt, and pigs, for example, are all genetically engineered. People don't know that. They go back to an ancient world where these types of technologies were more advanced than we have at Monsanto now. People don't want to believe that. They don't want to believe that they've bifurcated.
Let me add something here. H.G. Wells wrote about this years ago, and what he said is that you have to limit these technologies for the elite. And
well, that's what they want. You see, the whole idea is to...
for the population is genocide, is war, is poverty, is chaos. And that's where the world is right now. That's what Obama is doing.
Well, I'm going to try to get Dr. Ron Klatz on tomorrow. I'm going to try to get Dr. Ron Klatz on tomorrow or next week. He's the founder and president of the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. And we've talked about this. He had a conference 3 years ago where he said, Bill, should I go to this conference? He called me up. And he had to go to the Burj Dubai super complex there with all these billionaires flying in, trying to find out where is the state of art of literally life extension. And we are no more than 5 to 20 years away from the idea of zero senescence. In other words, you don't need to get old ever. We're talking about reversal of aging, organ growing, a whole new world where literally... that the medicine we practice now is so Mickey Mouse and so stupid. We don't integrate functional medicine, molecular medicine, toxicology, scalar technology. We don't do any of this. These doctors are so poorly trained, they're basically just script writing machines running in a gerbil cage trying to get a minuscule fee. And if they don't run fast enough, they get bumped out of practice. Or if they tick off their occupational medicine companies or the state licensing authority because they're innovative. Like in California here, for example, they create a giant industry across in Tijuana because the regulations in California, if a doctor recommends anything other than radiation and chemotherapy, they can have their license pulled and go to jail. That's the reason why no innovation is happening in a lot of areas in America, because of regulatory, sticky tape stuck all over things.
But
or the
this
threat
is by intention. That's the
by intention,
thing.
and it's the same way
intention.
they've also bifurcated so that all these highly classified companies like Bechtel Corporation and hundreds of companies, Hughes Aerospace, etc. All these companies are creating whiz-bang technologies that could relieve the stress on mankind, the danger of war, the danger of pestilence. And inadvertently, of course, the same people that developed the Hadron Collider developed the Internet, right? It came out of Europe. We know the individual who actually came up with the idea, who was working in collaboration with American private agencies, secure agencies like DARPA. And if this was unveiled to the world, like the Chinese are going to do anyway, whether we like it or not, the Chinese or Russians, which are, by the way, the best physicists on earth, are Russian, they will come up, if the Europeans or Americans will come up, and openly unveil fusion technology. Once this happens, with limitless energy, and literally you can have one in your home. You don't have to have one in a distributed giant grid that could knock down. And by the way, you don't have to have high-speed rail above ground. The best high-speed rail is through vacuum tubes underground, which they already build. And I took care of one of the employees who actually was working there with the high-speed rail, Bechtel Corporation companies actually drilling through the ground at 14 miles per day. And this is in the 90s.
Well, since we're about out of time, I just want to end by saying, look, this is what's open to us in the post-Obama era. But
exactly.
As long as Obama's in office, this is going to be suppressed, and we're going to be subject to murderous austerity and vast suffering.
Well, what they want to do is
out so that we can get to the post-Obama era.
They want to kill 6.8 billion out of 7+ billion people, and have life extension, cybernetic technology, and limitless energy only for the super elite. That's their objective. And if you don't like that, you better wake up and realize to fight it, because this is not sci-fi. We're living in this real world where this technology is suppressed on purpose because their plan is to murder you, your family, and your nation.
And people are dying.
They are dying now, and they're going to increase it, just like Ebola is now a new upgraded weaponized bug. We know the CDC has a patent on it. The length of incubation now of going from 4 to 21 days is a genetic augmentation. We know all the other plagues. I got documents given to me by HLI smuggled right out of the World Health Organization March 16th, 1997, when I was in Zurich, Switzerland. And I have the actual documents still. And I can tell you that the governments of the world, under the World Health Organization, the United Nations, which is a proxy of the British Empire, the Commonwealth, they're ready to slaughter most of mankind by plagues, war, pestilence, and economic devastation. They're ready to do it now. They're not waiting any longer.
Let's get Obama out before this happens.
Absolutely. I think we need a bonerectomy first before we do the Obamanectomy, because I have a feeling that there's some kind of anatomical connection there.
I think so. All right.
Thank you. I mean, the vision of the LaRouche Foundation is remarkable. That it's been there for so long, from Nawapa going right back to the 1950s and 60s. It should have been done decades ago. It's insane. Wonder why we're dying here of thirst in the Southwest? It's all on purpose.